Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm your host for today, Lucas Drege, Solution Specialist here at AgilePoint, and thank you so much for joining me today. The topic of today's conversation is one that I'm particularly passionate about, and that is building and maintaining small applications at scale. Over the course of the conversation today, we'll share with you why this is a crucial but often overlooked component of an application strategy for a digital business. Now, before we get into it here, I'd like to cover off a few quick housekeeping items. As you've probably noticed, your lines are muted. Now, that being said, we do want to encourage interaction, and the best way to do that is by using the questions panel in your Zoom console. If we don't get a chance to address your question over the course of the webinar today, we have 15 minutes set aside at the end of the session to go over questions as a group. For today's presentation, there's going to be two major components. Up front, I have a few quick slides just to introduce the concepts and themes that you'll see in the webinar. And during the second half, we'll show you a live example of how to build one of these small apps from scratch in about 15 minutes. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. So most of you are probably wondering, what are these small apps that we're talking about today? Well, just to give you some context, for many years, AgilePoint has been known for its ability to address the most complex and most strategic application needs. Over the last few years, a trend has begun to emerge among our leading enterprise customers, and that is to build and maintain applications at large scale. So today, we're going to focus in on what we'll call small apps. But don't let the name fool you. These apps are vital to your digital transformation because they make work easier and more natural and elevate the employee experience. They automate internal customer-facing processes and help you develop a competitive edge in your marketplace. And they fill a crucial gap that we see across organizations of all sizes. So first, let's take a look at the state of application development across most organizations. On the one hand, we have the focus of most IT departments, the complex back-office processes. These tend to have strategic value and align with core KPIs of an organization, but because they are complex, they tend to be fewer in number, often in the single digits or dozens at most, and are the target for many of the legacy and costly BPM solutions, and often exhibit a fairly minimal return on investment. On the other side of the coin, we have small apps. These tend to be front office or customer-facing collaborative types of applications. They fill in the gaps for existing software, make work easier, but are often the largest component of an IT organization's development backlog. So without a tool like AgilePoint, they more than likely will never ever get built. And just as an aside here, a lot of the data that we're showing you here on screen is coming from a recent BPM.com report. It's really quite illuminating. It shows the average investment and total cost of ownership for some of these legacy BPM platforms. So if you keep up with any of the industry press, you've probably seen the theme that digital transformation is in bad shape across most organizations. Now surely there's more than one reason for that, but one of the largest is this missing middle ground. This middle ground is an area that Forrester Research has recently identified as one of the keys to digital transformation success. We'll talk some more about the specifics in the coming slide here, but if you'd like a copy of the report or hear how AgilePoint has helped organizations tackle this middle ground, we have some excellent customer evidence linked on screen, and we'll include these stories along with the recording in the coming days. Okay, so let's speak to some of the specifics that were laid out in the recent Forrester Report and how AgilePoint helps address them. Well, the first, in order to accelerate digital transformation, we need to pervasively digitize the organization. And this is one area where many of the legacy BPM platforms tend to fall short. Right? Because of their cumbersome nature, most of the organizations simply can't leverage them across all of the areas of the business and for all application needs. In contrast, this is an area where AgilePoint tends to thrive, and the reason for that is that we can help you address a wide range of use cases, from the small apps that we'll be discussing today, customer-facing applications, as well as those apps that leverage IoT and AI. The next being a licensing model that supports pervasive digitization. As we'll show in some of the customer evidence slides, AgilePoint offers phenomenal price performance, and one of the reasons for that is its unique concurrent user pricing, where rather than requiring a license for every user in the organization, we look at the volume of users actively engaged in AgilePoint at any given time. Now, what this has really meant for our customers is they're able to start small and continue building value with licensing fees and costs that support that growth. Next is the need to deliver sustained digital transformation over the longer term. And this last one really speaks to the core of the AgilePoint vision, right? And that is to go beyond the focus of many of our competitors, which is fast and easy sort of development, to what we call a responsive or hyper-agile application. So by that I mean apps that respond to changes in underlying technologies, business conditions, and to handle ever-rising customer expectations without requiring costly refactoring and rebuilding exercises that robs your organization of the ability to continue to innovate. And finally, in the report, Forrester mentioned that process is one of the singular most important needs for any digital transformation. But therein lies the issue. Not all organizations are ready for process yet. In some cases, it's a goal that organizations are still working towards. And what's more, not every application requires it. Sometimes all we need is an application that creates, reads, updates, and deletes data in some data source, like Salesforce, SharePoint, or various databases. Now, it's with this in mind that AgilePoint has released its FormBased Apps capability to provide coverage for the full range of application needs. For some organizations, leveraging this small apps capability means enabling our customers to build out those tactical applications. And for others, it means it's a starting place for their own process maturity journey. By starting out with more fully featured CRUD applications, designers can easily build their skills and progress towards creating these process-based applications. So with that in mind, let's take a quick look at how we're enabling our customers to build any type of application and the components in AgilePoint that support this vision. So for those of you who have been speaking with AgilePoint for some time, you've long known that we're very able to handle process-driven applications of varying complexity, from something that might serve an individual department or team to a complex or long-running application that spans the entirety of the organization. As we'll focus on for the build from scratch portion of the presentation, the small application or form app capabilities is a great starting place for new application designers to build their skills before moving on to more complex process-based applications. A mobile app accelerator, which enables you to custom brand an AgilePoint mobile application and push out your AgilePoint apps to public, private stores, or for device-specific use. And of course, whatever it is that you build, it's all ready to be leveraged with your favorite cloud service. So let's talk a little bit about some of the customer evidence that we've seen over the years. Right, and this type of use case that we're seeing here, really enables our customers to build these very complex applications that was often the domain of some legacy BPM providers, but to do so at a fraction of the overall cost. Right, the first example that I'd like to share with you here today is one of the largest energy companies in Europe. They are running mission-critical plant operations and have executed more than 1 billion transactions since becoming an AgilePoint customer. At any given point in time, running 200,000 concurrent instances of their process, demonstrating that not only is AgilePoint capable of handling complexity, but also very large scale. Now, the next example that I have here for you is a communications infrastructure provider managing 100,000 sites across the world. They're using AgilePoint for mission-critical project management types of use cases, and as you can see from the screen here, have a very complex and involved application with more than 10 processes, 175 activities, and 65 user interface forms. And then lastly, a global automotive systems manufacturer with a very diverse and complex environment. 5 ERP solutions, 3 PLMs, with over 500,000 Salesforce users, SharePoint, and Office 365. And they're using AgilePoint to manage a global quotation and product delivery need using a highly dynamic AgilePoint process. And just to give you a sense here, right, this infrastructure communications provider, their annual subscription is below $50,000, right? So really speaking to that phenomenal price performance that I mentioned a little bit earlier on. Now let's speak a little bit to the digital advantage that can be created through this sort of pervasive digitization, right? Or attacking this middle ground and small app segment of the application portfolio. The first example that I'd like to go through today is a Fortune 100 manufacturer who rapidly created 2,000 of these types of small applications and digital process automation apps within 2 years, right? And did so to replace 8,000 legacy applications that they'd built over a period of 10 years. What really astounds me about this use case here is not only the speed at which they rebuilt those applications, but just how drastically they were able to consolidate their application portfolio, with 2,000 apps built on AgilePoint handling the workload of 8,000 applications previously. Here's another example from a global manufacturer, right? And again, really speaks to the speed and the scale at which AgilePoint is being used, right? One of the original providers of small apps was Lotus Notes. Now, Lotus Notes is being phased out across most organizations, and this organization selected AgilePoint to carry that workload. Right? And those 2,000 apps were built by a combination of different developer types. Your traditional professional developers in the IT department, but also the growing category of citizen developers, whether that be a line of business analyst or a true business user. And then lastly, right, and a great example of our customer success is with the Salvation Army West. Right? Again, another organization leveraging citizen development to build applications at large scale. Now, this is a slightly smaller organization than some of the others that we've talked about so far, but a single developer was able to build 10 applications by themselves in 2017, doubled that in 2018, and will again double that number in 2019, with a 70 to 80% reduction in the application lifecycle time. So let's give a few examples of these types of small applications, and we'll do so in the context of some of the most popular business systems. The first being Salesforce, right? A great candidate for these types of small applications is going to be things like lead qualification or account maintenance, field service, including using these applications in an offline mode, and to easily create executive dashboards. In the context of SharePoint, this might mean data management or dashboards, but also include InfoPath replacement. InfoPath is one of the largest blockers towards Office 365 adoption for the customers that I've spoken with, and using AgilePoint's form capability not only provides a much more powerful and easier to use replacement for InfoPath, it also helps clear that migration path to the cloud. And then lastly, as you've seen in a few of the examples so far, Leveraging AgilePoint's power and intuitive nature will help you expand the talent pool beyond IT to include the lines of business via citizen development. And then lastly here, before we get into the demo, some use cases around databases. Things like inventory management or order management for that matter, as well as surveys and checklists. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the demo. Okay, so for the build from scratch portion of this presentation, I'd like to show you how we can build a small application in about 15 minutes. The use case for today is going to be a timesheet. And for today's demo, we're going to build a responsive form-based application. In the next installment in this series, we'll show you how to take that form and add a process around it to approve the timesheet and write it to an external data source. But for today's demo, we're going to use a few different components. The first being AgilePoint's data entity and pick lists. This is our built-in data modeler that helps us reduce the technical bar for creating a custom business app and will help us automate a large chunk of this application's design. We'll also look up data against a database. We'll bring in data from a WCF service. Now this is going to be optional, right? The functionality here could also be achieved using a database lookup or a lookup for a data entity. But for demonstration purposes and to highlight how we can bring in data from multiple places into a single form, we'll use this service. And then we'll leverage AgilePoint's formula capabilities to calculate all of the timesheet data. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start here by adding an app. For those of you who are new to version 7, you'll see here that this form-based application capability is relatively new. And let's give my application a name. Now for today, I'm going to use a data entity as my primary data source, but I could do the same with databases, Salesforce, and SharePoint, with additional data sources coming soon. Okay, so let's give my data source a name of timesheet. And in this case, I want to search against custom entities only. Right? There's a number of out-of-the-box entities that come with AgilePoint. And I'm going to select my customer timesheet as my primary entity. Now here, I could optionally unselect various fields, and I can also bring over my child table. So now AgilePoint is creating a number of application components on my behalf. And we'll see that on screen here in just a moment. We have 2 blank forms, new timesheet and update timesheet, 3 views, all timesheets, as well as recently created and recently modified timesheets, with a lookup for each of those views. So this is going to drop me into my form designer here. And the first thing that I'll want to do is apply some shared CSS. I want my forms to have nice styling across each form in the application. So I'm just going to copy and paste here from my clipboard. And then enable my CSS. All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to bring in an image here. There's a couple of ways that I can do this. I'm going to use the image control just because it's the easiest. But alternatively, we could also use our raw HTML control to do the same thing. Now I can attach an image or just input a URL here, and I'm going to choose that option, which gives me a nice AgilePoint logo here in the top of my form. Okay, so the next thing I want to do here is bring in some dividers to help break up the various sections of my form. So to do that, I'm going to again go to my clipboard here and bring that over. And I want this divider to go all the way across here. So I'm just going to drag that all the way over. Okay, now as far as my form is concerned, you'll see on the right-hand side here that I have my data model. So I have a couple of different pieces that I want to bring over. Right, the first thing here is that I'll bring over the submitted by field. Let's just clean this up a little bit and give it a token value. Now what I want to do here is bring in the current logged in user's name. So to do that, I've expanded my Process Data Explorer, and I'll go into System Data. And let's do the user's full name. So that at runtime, the current logged in user's name will be displayed here as a default value. Okay, so next I'll do submitted date. We'll do the same thing here. Just clean it up a little bit. And give it a default value of the current date. Okay, so we're going to want to start bringing in some information about the customer that we're working for. So to do that, I'm going to select the drop-down list. This will be our customer name. And I'll want to do a lookup here against AgilePoint's data entity. So I'll select lookup list and click the plus button to add a new lookup. As you can see here, there's a number of lookup sources, but again, we want to use AgilePoint's built-in data modeler, so I'll select data entity. And this is going to be customer name. Now this is going to be a name and value pair here, so I'll select next. And again, I only want to look at custom entities. And then I'm going to select customer details from the list here. Now for both my name and value, I want the customer name here. And I'll click finish. And let's quickly test my lookup. So I don't need to deploy anything, right? I have the testing tools right here within the designer. And as we can see, this lookup is working just fine. Okay, so next I want to bring in the data binding feature here. So I'm going to drop customer name on top of that lookup list that I just configured. And let's start adding some additional fields here for the customer's information. So I'm going to use a text box for the customer contact. Later on in the demo, I will use a lookup to populate all of these values. I'm going to use a phone control to bring in the customer's phone number. All right. So next we'll use an email control for their email address. And then another text box for their physical address. Okay, now I want to just drag this all the way over and line it up with the other fields. Okay, great. Now I have my customer's information. I'll add my lookup a little later on, but for now, let's add a repeating section so that my consultants can add multiple timesheet entries with one single submission. Now let's make sure that my subform takes up all of the available space here. and I want to just drop my child table on top of my subform. Okay, so let's begin designing the subform. And you're seeing here that we're starting off with 2 columns. So I'll add 4 more. And if I click my database icon here, I can see all of the data in my child table. So the first thing that I want to do is I'll bring in a drop-down list. The reason for this here is I want to be able to select against the various customer purchase orders that I'm working against. So for here, I'm going to select customer PO. And let's configure this. Now in this case here, I'm going to use AgilePoint's built-in pick list capability here. And I'm going to use the customer PO pick list. So this is going to give me a list of all of the customer purchase orders that I might be working against. All right, so let's bring in the assigned hours value here for my data model. And again, let's just quickly clean this up and make it read-only. We're going to populate this field in another with a lookup in just a few moments. So next, I'm going to bring over the consumed hours, and we'll do the same thing. Make it read-only. Okay. So next, I'm going to bring over the description, right? So we can describe the work that we're doing for the customer. And this is not quite lining up here, so I'm going to change the number of display rows down to 2. And as you can see, it's all lined up now. Let's bring over the work date and then the work time. Okay. So now what I want to do here is bring in the number of hours that are available for each of these purchase orders. Right, so the way that we'll do that is we're going to configure a lookup. I'm going to add a new lookup source. This is also going to be against AgilePoint's data entity. Okay, so this is going to be multiple columns here because I want to set some values. Again, I want to look against custom entities only. And this will be our customer PO details entity. Now, I'm not interested in all of the fields here. I'm just going to select assigned hours. And let's map that from my data source. There we go. And for my where clause, I want customer PO to equal customer PO. And then click Finish. Now I want this to trigger on a specific field value change. So to do that, I'm going to select customer PO here. And now I've completed my configuration of this lookup. So let's add one more lookup here. This is going to be against a database this time. So I'll select database. To save some time, I had previously configured an access token. And this will be called get consumed hours. So we want to understand how many hours the customer has remaining that we can work against. This again will be multiple columns. And I have an option here, right? I can select a schema and a table, but for demo today, I'm just going to input a manual query. And let's validate this. All right, looking good. And again, I want to trigger this lookup on a specific field value change of customer PO. Okay, so now we need to bring in some formulas here to calculate the different values for the various timesheet entries. So to do that, I'm going to bring in a formula control. And this is going to be for the PO work time. Pardon me, total hours. Now this isn't a field we need to show on the form, so I'm just going to go over to behavior and make sure that this is invisible. And then let's bring in my formula. So this is going to be my consumed hours plus PO work time. We'll validate my expression and click OK. Okay, so now we can close out our subform. And we'll want to add one more formula to tally all of the hours entered for this timesheet. Okay. So let's input my formula here. So what you're seeing here is I'm taking the sum of all of the hours that have been entered. Let's validate it and click OK. So what this is doing is if I enter multiple rows here in my subform, this will tally all of the rows and all of the hours entered. Okay, so we're going to bring in one more lookup. This time, it's going to be against a WCF service. Now, this was just a design choice for this application, right? We could also look this data up against a database or AgilePoint's built-in data entity. So in this case here, I'm going to select my WCF service. I don't have an access token, so I'm going to add one now. I'll enter my URL and load it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do here is bring in the username and password. And test my connection. We'll give my lookup a name of customer details, and this is going to be multiple columns. Okay, so on the request mapping side here, I'm going to take the customer name and drop it over to the customer name side. And then for the response, I'm going to take the phone number and drop it over to the phone. Oops. phone number to the phone, email address to email address, physical address, and contact person. And click Finish. Now I want this lookup again to trigger on a specific field value change of customer name. Okay, so let's test all of my logic here. Okay, so I'm selecting a customer name and it's populating all of their details. And let's add a few entries here. Okay, so all of my formulas are working fine, which means that this application is ready to be published. Now before I publish it, I just want to make sure that I can carry over all of those form details over to my update timesheet form. So AgilePoint's going to ask me if I want to do that. I'll click yes. Now, optionally, I could make some changes here. I could use the bulk edit feature to make certain fields read only. But for now, let's just save and check it in. And publish our application. Optionally, I can set permissions here or notify any users that this application is ready for consumption. But let's click Close and begin to run our app. So when I go over to my list of applications, I'll now see a new app. Now I entered some data here previously just to have something to show when I pull this up. But as you can see, right, for any of the past submissions, I can view the data. I can make an edit to the data or delete it if I have permission. But let's just add a new entry here. And we'll add one more. And click Submit. So as you can see here, here is the new entry that we just created. I can easily view it, make modifications, or select a default view. So that concludes the demo section for today. Let's go over and do some Q&A.
The first question that I have here is, are these forms responsive? Yes, they are responsive. Within the designer, you do have the option to tailor a layout for specific device types or specific orientations. But in many cases, it's not going to be a required component, right? The responsive nature is going to take care of that. The next question I have here is, does AgilePoint have a reporting capability? Yes, we do. We have a capability called Agile Reports, which enables you to report on process data, application data. I can easily join additional tables if I so desire, right? But on the other hand, given that we're persisting all of the application data by default to a SQL database, right? We can use any reporting tool that you might like. Now, the next question that I have here is, how is AgilePoint different from Microsoft Power Apps? It's a great question. It's one that we run into quite a bit, over the last few years. I would say the primary difference is going to be a couple of things, right? For one, there's simply a much broader set of user interface controls within AgilePoint, right? Gives us an ability to more easily handle different types of data. Right, and the second being, from what I've seen, a lot in Power Apps is going to be based on Excel expressions, right? Which is going to be favorable for certain types of users. right? But having the ability to declaratively build rules or create integrations and things of that nature within AgilePoint means that there's a broader appeal to AgilePoint's application designer. It's a great question. There's a question on the data entity screen showing SharePoint as beta status. Yeah, that's a good question. That simply just notes that this is a new function from our last release, Software Update 1. With our second software update coming in a couple of months, that will be moved out of beta. It is available now today for use. The next question that I'm getting here is, how do we move these apps from dev to prod, right? That's a good question. AgilePoint has really made the deployment process of these applications very straightforward, right? If you wanted to do this manually, there is a one-click process to move an application between environments, right? Essentially, we package everything up into a zip file that can be moved from dev to prod as an example, right? But there's also ways to automate deployment as well. The first being using an AgilePoint process, right, where you create your various approvals and then AgilePoint automatically deploys the application from one environment to another, right? And the second being to hook into your existing DevOps tool, right? So you can always use that existing tooling alongside AgilePoint as well. I have another question here for digital signature capabilities, right? Can I create an app that moves documents through approval? Absolutely. It's a great question. AgilePoint supports the most popular digital signature providers, right? So by that, I mean DocuSign, Adobe Sign, and Certify, right? And in addition, if you don't want to pay for a third-party licensed digital signature tool, you can always use what we call our drawing shape, right? Where you would use your mouse or your finger on a mobile device to draw your signature on the form, right? Great questions. Okay, so are any of these features available on AgilePoint version 6? The form-based app capability and the data binding feature that you saw today is available with the AgilePoint version 7 release. Great question. Next question that I have here is, what happens if you are running processes and have to change the process on demand? That's a great question, and it's something that comes up a lot with customers who are going through continuous improvement exercises, right? There might be a change to the process, logic on a form as an example, data model, right? And all of those changes can be migrated live from one version to another. We have a version migration capability within our Manage Center, right? This is typically something that is very closely controlled by permission, right? But does give that ability to migrate a process live from one version to another. There's a question here around importing from other sources like SharePoint or Access. So SharePoint is in the product today. That was an option that I could have selected as a part of that initial data source selection. Things like Access, Excel, those are all being explored currently by the product team. I have another question here around connecting UiPath bots to an AgilePoint process application. That's a great use case, right? One that we're seeing a huge uptake in over the last couple of years, right? Because there are respective strengths for both RPA as well as a process-based application. So to answer your question, yes, there is native integration into UiPath in the product today, where we can pass fields between RPA and AgilePoint, or vice versa as an example, right? And we'll be supporting Blue Prism RPA with our coming release. Great question. Okay, I have another question here around customer community. Yes, we do have a developer community, right? We'll make the links available to all of you post the webinar today. But in short, if you visit our website, click on support, you will see an option to view and join the customer developer community. Great question. Okay, next question here is there a way to use Alteryx via the API to execute data transformation as a part of a process? Yes, absolutely, right? So there's a couple of ways that we can do that, right? The first being to use some of the more generic endpoints like REST, SOAP, or WCF, right? So that can always be used, though that may be, less friendly to someone who is, with a business analyst sort of skill set. Right, so the other option there, rather than using the more generic endpoints, is to use AgilePoint's extension framework. Right, this enables us to do a number of things, right? But one of them is to create additional integrations, right? We refer to them as connectors, or additional process activities, right? So you have those two options there for something like Alteryx: the more generic endpoints, and then creating a custom connector via the extension framework. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in here. There is one remaining. Will this webinar be available for download? Yes, we'll be sending this off to you a little bit later on today. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions then, I'd like to thank everyone for your engagement. I apologize for the issue that we were facing today, but later on today, we'll send out a link to the recording with the full build from scratch demo. All right, thanks so much everyone for attending. Until next time, bye-bye.